Hi, and welcome to Together, the podcast where we dive into that juicy terrain of conscious partnership and parenting so that we can bring you the lived experience, the conversations, the tools, the skills for you to deepen in love in your relationships. I am your host, Mike Elliott, and with me is Courtney Wren. We have devoted our entire life to learning and refining our skills in this relational space. And we're so grateful that you have decided to join us on that journey. Before we dive in, shout out to our sponsor, MINDFULMEDS. Oh my God, I love their product so much. I've been using their Happy Days for a while now, and they have a whole plethora of other amazing medicinal mushrooms that you can take in to bring in more joy, more relaxation, more relief in social engagements with their product called Social Spark. And because you are a loyal listener, you get a discount, 15% off. All you got to do in the promo code section when you go to checkout is just put in Together and you'll get 15% off. Okay, now let's dive into it. Hi, and welcome to the Together podcast. We are your hosts, Mike and Courtney. And this is the terrain where we love to dive into that juicy terrain of conscious partnership, conscious parenting. It's like one of our favorite things to explore. It's our whole life's devotion. And we love bringing our relationship to this space. And we also equally love bringing on guests. And today is a day where we have a guest. And we're so excited to announce Gloria Zhang. Hello, Gloria. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, you even said it the right way. Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I met Gloria at the Awakening Her Summit that Deidre Siriani put on, and I just loved Gloria's speech and how she shared and could just feel how she really embodies and teaches in this relational field. And there she was talking about attachment styles and how we move towards the right partner and the way that that influences and shapes our journey of relationship. And she does beautiful inner child work is the main kind of focus. And then we have a lot of resonance. She's also a therapist and has a lot of training and background in that world. And then also has her own story that she's been sharing about her own journey of healing. And so we'd love for you to introduce yourself, Gloria, and just share who you are and the magic that you bring to the world.
Before she goes into her story, I just gotta say, I love your level of stage presence.
You do. You have it.
You're new to my world, and watching you deliver your medicine,
yes,
what it is that you teach and you support people in, I can really feel the layers of work that you've done. And wow, like just stage presence is remarkable.
Yeah.
Well, wow, guys. I'm so flattered. I could easily say the same thing about you. This is the first time I've been on a podcast with a couple. Being able to see your connection live on screen while doing this interview it's really special. It's not something I've experienced before. So kudos to you guys and the amazing listeners tuning in today. So thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Now your juicy story.
My story. Oh, that's right.
Yeah. How did you get to the inner child work?
Oh boy. I've been here for about 33 years, but I feel like I didn't really start living until I healed my inner child. To give a little bit of background, I had quite a turbulent childhood growing up. I've never seen an example of a healthy, lasting relationship or marriage on either side of my family. There was a lot of addiction. There was people going to jail. There was divorce, cheating, a lot of unhappy couples. And that was the norm for me growing up. And so lo and behold, I told myself a story that one day I was going to find my Prince Charming and I was going to end the cycle, that wouldn't be me. unfortunately, I found myself back in the same situation as my generational past. For about 10 years, I found myself as the rebound girl, as the girl who was hopping from one relationship to the next and felt like I had a magnet on my forehead where every man I attracted was either a narcissist, was either a cheater, or who just didn't want to settle down.
Mhm.
So something was very wrong here, especially because I had a background as a therapist. I'm very aware of the fact that only a teeny tiny percentage of the population is actually a narcissist, and the majority of men are actually just regular good dudes. And so, why was I attracting the 10%? Why was I attracting the 20%? There was some sort of disconnect there. And it was only until I discovered inner child healing that I realized this was not about men. This was not about what was happening out there. It had everything to do with the fact that I was carrying wounds from my father, from my mother, and I was the one creating these patterns in my relationship. And I was the one attracting and choosing specific partners. That was a huge light bulb moment for me. And I met my inner girl for the first time. And after doing that work for a few months, then I was able to attract my husband now. And this was 4 years ago, right? And so that was the first time I was able to connect with a man on a truly deep emotional level, someone who really wanted me, who fought for me, who cherished me, who wanted to be with me. And now I help other ladies do that. And it's been history ever since. So that's my story.
Beautiful. I'm curious, when you made contact with little Gloria, what would you say when you first made that contact and there was that awareness of how much her experiences were impacting what you were attracting and experiencing in relationship and contributing? What would you say she needed the most? Like
Mm.
what was her big hurt? What was her core wound? What was she needing that she didn't get?
Her biggest core wound, which turns out is almost everybody's core wound who ends up in this space, is that she didn't believe she was lovable and acceptable for being exactly who she was, her authentic self. And so she felt the need to present different masks in different situations. So in relationships, she would either be the good girl, right? Or
Mhm.
she would be the perfect girlfriend, the cool girl, right? And in work situations, she would be the boss bitch and present this layer of uh, being really in control, being really competent. And it was peeling back those layers and realizing I wasn't either of those things. I'm not a good girl. I'm not a boss bitch. I'm somewhere in the middle, somewhere that was something that was being lost in these harsh labels was who I truly was in all of my imperfections and all of who I truly was. And to answer your question, Mike, I think what she actually needed wasn't a man, it wasn't a relationship. She needed me to see her and recognize that she actually did have needs. She needed me to be on her side, fighting for her, so that she could learn what it felt like for someone else to fight for her.
Mm-hmm.
I get chills when you share that. And I love having this conversation because this is such a key part of for us because we work with couples is, this place where um so much of the healing can't happen here until it's also happening inside, and
Yes,
that place where like we're looking outside for something, but we're really needing, I'm needing to turn towards myself. I'm needing to,
exactly.
yes. And I love this way of talking about it as and we kind of dove into this on the live, right? That it's not until you're able to really, like for me in my journey, it was learning how to embody my own inner masculine and be my own, like I was really doing a lot of that work before calling Mike in, and really, getting to know the parts of me that are like the containment and the strength and these different qualities, and learning how to be that for myself, that I could even notice outside where those qualities were, or even know like what kind of a partner I would need or what kind of ingredients. But I really had to kind of go in and find that for myself and discover that for myself before I could orient to it outside. And I always think it's so interesting how in the relational world, it's really this dance between that when I meet it here, then it can show up here, in the relational space. And then and then also when I meet it in the relational space, then I can bring that back to that inner child. And so I guess I'm curious, what was that like for your inner child and you when you did finally meet your partner and you were feeling met in that place? How was that for you? What was that experience like?
It's funny you say that. I have a really popular episode called Got Daddy Issues.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things that I say to my single ladies is, you got to be your own daddy first, girl.
Yes.
Don't
Yes.
go looking out there. So I
Yes.
say that jokingly and in jest, but there is a aspect of truth to it. I
Yes.
love the way that you put it. I think there is that spiritual aspect of what's within is also without. And that's where we see that reflection and mirroring happening. But wow, like when I when I went through this myself, at first there was a lot of resistance because the layer that I was really struggling to work with is, this is so unfair. And there was a feeling of, why do I have to do more work when I've been so strong all this time? I've been all by myself all this time. Why can't someone else just step up and rescue me? Why does it have to be me? I spent so long in that space, years and years, really wrestling with this idea of, there's no white knight coming to save me, but it doesn't mean that the white knight isn't going to appear. It's just that that's not his job to rescue me from myself. I had to do that piece first because that's our purpose of being here on earth. This is an individual experience of developing and growing ourselves. And it just so happens that we're around other people who are also going through their own stuff. And so whatever I cultivate within myself is what I bring into relationships eventually. But it's not all 100% on me or 100% on him to
That's
fix
key.
me.
Yes.
That's so
That's
key.
right.
Right? It's I need to bring myself up to a certain level first before I'm ready to call someone in. So again, the key here is, it's not about becoming perfect before you bring in a relationship. It's just about getting yourself up enough to a certain level where you can invite someone in, and then the relationship becomes the rest of the work. And then the relationship becomes the greater container in which you're then in relation to someone else who's also triggering you and healing you at the same time. And so, to answer your question, Courtney, it was a lot of inner fighting, a lot of resistance, working through that feeling of unfairness, right? Why do I have to do all this work and everyone else gets to have a healthy, happy relationship? But then recognizing that we all have our boss battle, which is what I call it. We all have that next mountain that we're climbing on, and this just happened to be mine. And there's no judgment or comparison. It is what it is. And as soon as I did it and just addressed it and showed up for myself, then it got a little bit easier. And then the next one got a little bit more easier until eventually, I feel great now. I'm very happy in my relationship, but it really was that first initial step of accepting that responsibility, which is it's so hard. It's so hard.
Mhm.
It's so important. And what I find in, in the couples work that we do with clients that I work with, in our own experiences, I find that there's this certain level of foundation that you talked about where there needs to be enough of the inner child work done so that when the
Yes.
relationship's attracted, then all the triggers that come up, that's the continual work. It's not like you said, it's not, okay, my inner child's healed, good to go. Like,
That's
never
right.
have to go there again. It's just, but now there's enough relational skill, how I find this, to parent myself inside so that when I'm meeting other and unconsciously, there are ingredients that I've attracted that perfectly match my upbringing and my
Balance.
generational line. When that's familiar and I go into the unconscious reactivity of what it reminds me of that's still unresolved, I get to slow down. I get to be like, okay, little dude. Oh, yeah, this is reminding you of this. And I feel like that's such an important piece to the inner child work, is how to integrate it and understand its ongoing work.
Mhm.
And so I'm curious, now that you've attracted this relationship from this place of enough foundation, is what I hear. Now, in the relationship dynamic that you're in, there's two questions I have here. One curiosity I have is, had he already been doing his own inner child work and that's what you had attracted for the work to be able to integrate? Because my experience is, if one person is doing it, it doesn't translate in the relationship.
Mm.
So I'm curious about that. And then let's start with that one. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, like
Great question.
what level of work had he done for you to be able to continue your work? And
Mhm.
yeah.
Hmm. I like this question because it lets me take a trip down memory lane a little bit, which is I'm very fond of. And he couldn't be here today. He was invited, but
Mhm.
Andrew is he's not a public speaking type of guy at all. So it's probably better for your show that he wasn't here, to be honest. Not his
And I get
forte,
it.
but
I get it. It can be a big thing
Yeah.
to be in these spaces and be in the
yes.
relationship, like, and talk about it vulnerably. It's an edge.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But he won't mind if I speak on his behalf.
Beautiful.
Um, Andrew is uh, coming into the relationship was already a very secure person,
Mm.
and he had done previously a lot of inner work on his own. So to answer your question, it's yes. So he had gone through a period of really acknowledging his own patterns, taking care of his health, but he also had this innate ability to be aware of his role at all times. And what was really important for me is that I wasn't looking for someone who was perfect, because that doesn't exist. I just wanted to be with someone who was able to apologize and
Mhm.
actually take meaningful action if something had occurred. That was the most important thing for me, because I didn't get that growing up. My parents, and even one of them, especially to this day, is very, very stubborn, doesn't like to revisit the past, doesn't like to talk about the hard stuff. And so that piece was really important to me. I think for some people, it's something that you're born with, but for others, I do think that level of self-awareness can be cultivated, especially if we have the courage to be honest with ourselves and really be accountable for our actions and our behaviors. So that was really the key for me.
I love that you're naming that, because that was the thing that made me know that that Mike was the person to keep journeying with. Is again and again, when there would be these places, he would, whether in the moment or go away, he could always come back and name, oh, and without me saying, you need to own he would just come back and be like, oh gosh, I realized this and this. Like he would just own and over, just keep owning, like, oh, this is what I'm learning. Oh, and it was so refreshing and beautiful. And also just that willingness, one of the first big kind of uncomfortable ruptures we had, I remember this moment of, me having a boundary and there was this confusion. And then he was just vulnerable. He was real. This is what was happening for me. I'm so, and just that willingness to kind of get in the mud together and be real. And then it was like, oh, and that place of, right, it's not looking for someone, it's not like studying like who has the healed the most or who has the least amount of patterns, because you could also be with someone, another version of this is you could be with someone who had a healthier upbringing, but if they don't have those awarenesses or that self-awareness, then those places that you start to bump into, which you will, are going to be hard to navigate if the other person, and so it's not as so much about what are the patterns, it's more about what are the skills and the capacity to be with it. Yeah. And that kind of like we're in it together. Like we're in it together. Like this is what's happening for me. This is what's happening for me. Yeah.
And the perceived health too.
Uh-huh.
Just to touch that piece, because there's a lot of people in those partnerships where they perceive that they had a really healthy childhood, but the pattern is so enforced by that's some examples I've seen of being nurtured by the family field that they're all kind of like bolstering up the big blind spot and like living in grandiosity of like, I'm good. Yeah, but my partner really needs to sort their stuff. It's like, okay. So I really love what you named, because there's something really specific there when you said the quality that you wanted and you needed for your own experience. So what I hear is you being the mom and dad for like little Gloria, of like, I'm needing a man, like getting to touch that part is how I'm experiencing it when you share it, is, oh, here's that little Gloria and she really needs a man who can apologize and acknowledge where there's hurt and harm. It's like, oh, that gives me chills. That's huge, because this is where that individual work gets to move into the interdependence of like, whoa, these are the qualities, knowing that, like what I hear there is like knowing the nature of your journey and how many times you didn't get that. You're going to need equally as many times throughout your relationship of the thing that will heal that and repair that.
Beautifully
So
put.
yeah, so beautiful, because this is where I find culturally we're trying to figure it out, is how I see it, is there's this, okay, shit, we went super codependent, we've been in really toxic dynamics, we've been beating each other up, trying to unconsciously get needs met, and then the swing of, well, I'm just going to do everything on my own, I'm going to heal myself, I'm going to read all the personal development books, I'm going to do all the courses, but then there's almost an isolation in it of like not sure how to come back into relationship. And I feel this is the space that I love to explore, is like, here I feel like what's being touched is, okay, get to know the patterns, like what I heard. Did you say Andrew? Is that his name?
Andrew, that's right.
Yeah. So where Andrew like did his work, his patterns, built the capacity to be vulnerable enough to acknowledge, yeah, I did that, or I'm so sorry, I hurt you. Like such a big piece. So I just love feeling this place where the individual work meets the relationship. And that brings me to my next question. So now you've got Andrew, he was doing his work, had built a lot of secure attachment in there. You had been doing the work. So now that you're in partnership, what would you say are the sticky places? Like, in your individual work that comes up, like you said, it's like, yeah, you trigger each other. So like, what would you say, if you're open to sharing, like what are the sticky places, or like what are the current patterns that you're learning about in yourself, that little Gloria's, now that there's more safety, like little new parts are coming in, like what would you say is most alive in the dynamic, and then how do you both meet that for each other?
And I just want to also mention that just because somebody goes to therapy doesn't
Yes.
automatically mean that they have that quality of being open and aware, right? And so these are just little tricky things that we can fall into, of
Yes.
assuming certain things.
Oh, I know.
But
Just to
yeah.
name like the archetype of that, right? It's
Oh,
like
yeah.
the person who's like done all the things and gone to all the workshops and all of the, but then you're relating with them and you're like, I don't feel heard, or I don't
Yeah.
feel, yeah, that's right.
Or their little kid grabs all the lingo
Yeah,
from all of
that's
those
right.
courses and uses it as
Yeah.
a weapon, like weaponizing.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are tons of
Right.
narcissists being validated in therapy right now. Being
Yes,
told,
that's right.
you know, oh, you just have to take care of yourself. Oh,
Yes.
no one's
Yes.
perfect.
It's true.
Not about that.
I'm glad you spoke to that. And there's something you've shared in your content that we speak to a lot also, is tracking the actual behaviors, not the words that are being said.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So important.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yes, I'm not dodging your question. There's, yeah, I Mike, the way that you described it of transitioning from the singleness to relationship, I've actually never put it that way before. And I'll have to listen back to hear the word that you phrased it, because that's sort of my little area of expertise working with women, is single women who are now trying to make that transition. So, and you did kind of mention it, but excuse me, there's a bit of an ego that we can develop when we start our healing journey. And it's very tricky. It's this ego of, oh, I'm so healed now.
Yeah.
The ego of, oh, I've done this many courses, I've gone to this many coaching sessions. And so now I am in a relationship. You have to be very, very careful of that. But I was definitely susceptible to that myself. And it was that was one of my patterns, was unconsciously choosing men who were earlier on their healing journey so that I could be the healed one.
Yes.
Not
Yes.
very
I know this
nice
one.
for the ego to feel, right?
Yeah.
And so it was extremely humbling in the first year of our relationship when he had pointed out some of my toxic behaviors. Oh boy. There's two major ones, and I don't mind sharing this. The first one is that sometimes I interrupted him when he was speaking. And I was so proud of the fact that I was such an accomplished therapist. There was no way that I was bad at listening, but I was. And the second thing is that sometimes he'll tell me to do something and I will forget. I'll just forget it. And he feels invalidated because I wasn't paying attention to his needs. That was a huge shock to my nervous system. And it basically dismantled my self-identity, where I was so proud of the fact that I was so healed, I was so spiritual, and I was such a great therapist. I was so good at helping other people. Yet I had all of these aspects of myself that I wasn't aware of because I'd never had a healthy partner who was able to mirror that back to me. And so the tricky part was learning to love myself while simultaneously recognizing that I had some not so great behavior that I had to actively work on.
And what would you say in that? What is he needing in his story rewrite? That's the language we use there, is like, being in partnership, we get to be allies to rewrite the story. Rewrite the story of our childhood, of our generational line, of where the hurts were. So what would you say is the material or the connection, the reassurance? Like, what is it that he's needing to rewrite his story in the places where that pattern, my imagining he attracted, of being invalidated?
Yes.
Like, what's the part that you get to contribute to him to feel more secure and met relationally?
Well, luckily, because of that foundational work that I had done already, I was able to pull through and be the exact same person that I needed him to be. I dealt with my ego, who was very resistant to this new information, I acknowledged my part in this and I took meaningful steps to move forward. And that meant that I wasn't just saying it to please him or to make him stay, but that I truly, genuinely was trying to be more present, was trying to catch myself in moments where he felt that I was interrupting him or not listening, and that I made that a priority, right? And I made sure that he understood that he was a priority too. I think that's the biggest thing is it's yes, it's about the behavior, but it's also about what that behavior represents. And in that moment, what it represented was that I wasn't hearing him, that I wasn't putting him first, right? And so that was the work for me. And it's still like it, as, and you guys know this too, but when you get through that first layer of relationships, then it evolves into something else. And nowadays, whatever was in our early stage of the relationship, we don't really deal with anymore because we've outgrown it and it's evolved into something different. And so there's always going to be something that life throws at you that you work through. But I feel that it gets easier over time. It was hardest at the beginning, right? I had a lot of issues adjusting to this relationship. But with each victory, you become closer, you feel more confident in your ability, and it grows and it evolves.
I feel like that there's something here that's so important just to kind of like bookmark is this, and I so have a resonance with this part of your story, this like we can really believe that if we met, an emotionally available man, if we had the right container, that then it would just all feel so good. Or, it would just be like all 100% yes. It would, this is sort of the story. And I also noticed that being spoken. And I can only speak for my nervous system, but I know for me, when I met Mike, even though there was so much in my body and nervous system that knew, like, yes, so many green lights, and yes, this feels so good, there were other parts of me that were resistant, freaking out. Like, how I would describe it too is, I was starting to feel all the parts of me that I didn't feel relationally before because there wasn't enough ground and love. And so great. Now that here's this person who's loving me. Now here's this person where there's safety. And now all of a sudden I can actually feel deeper, not that I hadn't before, but now deeper inside of myself, all these other parts of my nervous system, and that surprised me because one of the things that was the most confusing for me in my nervous system, and I know that this happens for other people out there, is there was an interesting thing where when I was with people that had some of these toxic or hurtful patterns that were familiar to my family field, my body read that as love and would actually send me feelings of love. And so, right. And then remember how confused I was at the beginning? And then I would move towards Mike and my body would like have all these like feelings. And it was but it was because it was unfamiliar. It was unknown. It was a different kind of love. And I had to work through a really big layer. I'd never been avoidant in a relationship before. I'd always been more the anxious one who was fixing and helping and rescuing was my pattern. And then when I met Mike, he didn't need rescuing or fixing or, and he was leaning towards me. And then my nervous system went really avoidant. Right. Yeah. I went really avoidant. But this is what I want to name though.
Skeptical.
I was super skeptical. I was trying to figure out what the trick was. But what I want to name is, even though that was all arising in my nervous system, because we had the skills, then I could name that, like I could name, this is what's coming up for me. I noticed there's this really big pull away, my nervous system, and then Mike was able to be an ally for me in the unwinding of what that was, and I was able to lean into all the work I'd done before to be real about that, to be vulnerable, to speak to it, to, we had to be curious together. Well, what does my nervous system need, to sort of titrate into this new kind. And I love what you said there too, because that was my experience. where wow, like I it was a simultaneous, like when Mike could equally meet me and equally call me out and equally, and it was like, and there wasn't this imbalance. There was a part of my soul that was so grateful and so relieved and like, yes, yay, yay, yay. But also it was like, oh, so uncomfortable to like, to, and
who the hell do you think you are?
but then also like the relief of like, oh, okay, I don't have to be perfect. And this is one of the things that we've noticed doing work with couples together, and the fact that we share about our relationship is the most common thing people reflect is that what they get out of all of the things we're talking about is they're like, oh, I keep thinking there's this place we're going to get to that's perfect. And what I'm learning and watching you and Mike is you're in it too. You're in life, you're in it. There's stuff, but it's more, how are you moving through it, as opposed to you reach this place where now, yeah, you have everything figured out. And I actually think that's the essence of love, right? That's really the essence of love is I'm not trying to get to this perfect place. I'm actually revealing my alive in process self to you, and you're revealing your alive in process self to me, and we're supporting each other in that. We're being curious about that. We're meeting each other in that. I actually had a question for you that I'd love to dive into is, what do you think are some really important conversations for people to be having in a conscious way at the beginning of relationship?
Ooh.
This is a question we've had people kind of reach out and ask. Yeah.
And I love everything that you said just now. But yeah, in terms of questions to ask early on, I think there's an inner hope that we have that when we meet someone for the first date, there's going to be fireworks. We're going to know in the hearts of our hearts that this is love at first sight, right? And then the magic happens. And even if people don't admit it, there is a small part of everyone that sometimes secretly longs and hopes for something like that to take off. And, you know, a lot of it is movies that we've grown up on and our romantic selves. But before even getting to the questions, I think it's important to keep in mind that it takes some time to see and interact with someone in various different scenarios before we can really see who they truly are. So like in my work, I call this the 8 different milestones, right? So there's different scenarios that you want to see them in, like how do they react when you get sick? Are they different with their friends versus when they're with you? And just being able to experience them in a variety of different life situations so that we're not clouded by our feelings of limerence or our feelings of infatuation. So that's sort of the foundation that I would want to set for that question, that there is a process of really seeing who someone is and not just what they say.
Yes, thank you for saying that. We have a joke about like, can you paddle a canoe together? What happens if you're in a canoe and you're
If you judged me off of being in a canoe with a mountain dog.
Yeah, we had a funny experience of that, but we made it through.
Yeah. I love it because what I find in those situations is like, even when I reflect back to that, so you know, Courtney and I early on in our relationship, we'd pack up the canoe
to go camping.
We're loaded with gear and a dog that's moving back and forth.
A really, really big dog.
A really big dog.
Yeah.
And I got super triggered, but it's super helpful what you're saying, because you really would have got the evidence of what my core wounding is and what my tender places are. And it's like, there it is.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to be choosing to be in life.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like there's elements of control in there. There's elements of just, you know, these tender places. And I love what you're sharing, because when we're actually in life, because it's one thing to go and just be in the perfect setting on date night and have it all pre-planned, but being in life in stressful situations, that's where this is where we get squeezed.
We get to know each other.
This is where we actually get to know, like, what's actually in there. Who will I be relating with when the brain's not on drugs in the beginning of the connection, where it's all about
Mm-hmm.
The body's just wanting to procreate. Like, what's the long distance piece? What's in
Yes.
there? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you guys put it perfectly. That's the main reason I don't personally place all the emphasis on the exact questions, but more of the context. But there are some good questions that can stimulate great conversations. So obviously, and this is so obvious, but people skip it because they want to feel like they're in a romance. But you need to know what the other person is looking for. Right? Like,
Yes.
if you
Yes.
want kids or don't want kids, you need to talk about these things. You know, if you're looking for a long-term relationship, if you care about marriage, these are big deal breakers that the sooner we, and I'm not saying within 5 minutes you go into a deep vulnerable dive, but
Wait
sooner
15.
rather than later. Yeah, that's right. I mean, we need to make sure that we're at least on the same page in terms of what we're looking for. But other than that, I love questions about each other's childhoods so that you get a sense of what their experience was like, what their relationship with their parents was like. Asking questions that invite vulnerability, right? Like, what's, what was something, the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to you? Seeing if there's openness to talk not just about the good stuff, but if there's openness to talking about the more difficult stuff as well. And those things can be very telling in terms of how comfortable we are with the the ups and the downs of life. And are we just putting on a front? Because just like Mike said, it's so easy to put on your best face for a 90-minute date, right? I mean, anyone can really do that with enough practice, but are we really getting to the heart of knowing and understanding who that person is after the 90 minutes and when life actually happens? Because when you're in relation to someone, it's not a 90-minute performance. It's real life. You go through life where people get laid off. There's economic recessions. People get sick. Family members pass away. We're buying houses. We're potentially having children together. If you can't get past the basic stuff, how are you going to deal with life together? In my opinion, life is already so challenging. And so you don't want your relationship to be even more challenging than life itself. You want someone who can do life with you.
I have a question. So, what was it that you saw in me that helped you feel like there was red flags or sorry, green flags?
Green flag. Point out the red flag.
You could.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I love how you guys just looked at each other at the same time. That was so cute. Probably get it all the time.
I don't. Yeah.
Yeah, the green flags for me, like I have to give a touch of backstory because I was previously married. When that relationship ended, I went deep into my inner child work. It was like I went deep, deep, deep. And then the more I did that work, the more I got clear on the qualities that I really wanted in partnership. Like the more I met me and the more I brought outside connections, therapists, counselors, spiritual guides, and I got to know me and actually be met with the ingredients that I did need from the outside that would represent mom and dad, then I could feel that quality in me of like, oh, that's what it's like to be met in that way. Now I can parent those parts of me. So when I met you and I had done that work and I had spent a long time of just being in my own energy and being single, I practice intentionally of cultivating lots of female relationships with a lot of boundary and not letting it go into sexual intimacy, and to get to know like what are the qualities beyond the initial just the hormonal attraction, like what is it that I really value in partnership and who am I wanting to spend life with, because I knew in me I wanted long-term relationship. That's what I wanted. So when I met you, the qualities that I really found before I met you was I really wanted a feminine who was sensitive, but I also needed a feminine for my journey and my story because I'm a big, powerful man. When my imprints take over or my little wounded boy takes over, I can steamroll. I can just wash over a woman and convince and manipulate. So the qualities that I saw in you that were green lights is you were a big energy. You were super sensitive and you can bring in the love and the compassion when I was in a vulnerable place. But if I was in a place that was a blind spot, you would get really big and pull it out. And it was so relieving. It was so refreshing
She
of
can
just,
handle herself.
oh yeah, like her fierce feminine would be like snarling in my face to call out that peace, and I would be like liberated by it. And once I started to experience that, and it wasn't shaming, it wasn't blaming, it wasn't like castrating me, but it was fierce loving of like, you will not do that with me. And I see that, and I'm not okay with that. And those are the qualities ultimately where I was initiated and liberated in that exchange with you of like, oh, this is someone I can be in life with. She's going to call me out on my shit, but she's also going to be really sensitive because I'm a Cancer moon. And so I feel really deeply. So I also need like the gentleness, the sweetness, and um those are some of the green lights, and that you had already had clarity on the direction you were going, the mission that you were on. Like I really needed that in partnership. I needed a feminine who had herself, had done her work, had developed community, clear in your patterns, able to take responsibility and acknowledge where you were hurt. And in the beginning, where you would be able to acknowledge like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm totally going avoidant right now. I'm totally withdrawing love right now. I'm just so triggered.
Such a healed thing to say.
Yeah. And it was so refreshing for me to have someone, because my story rewrite for the little dude in me is someone to actually take ownership that they are contributing a quality that is harmful for me. And having someone reflect that is like, oh God, thank God. Because it's like, yeah, the hurt's gonna happen, but she can see it, she can own it, she can apologize, similar to yours. Like for you, Gloria, of like that there could be the apology and like that those were some green lights for me. Yeah.
I love
I'm
that.
I'm curious for you, Gloria, is something that I'm because you had said your like ideal client is mainly women. Is that right?
Yeah, just when it comes to relationship work with inner
Yeah.
child work, I work with anyone. But I recognize and honor that the dating experience for men is vastly, vastly different than it is for women. So not an expertise in men's dating, but for women, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm curious on a question there when it comes to the women, is I'm curious because what I find is there's generally, once you start, supporting many people, there's these themes that pop up. And I'm curious, like what are the pain points in the feminine that are really showing up in the work that you do? Like what are those little inner girls needing from the masculine to feel safe in the world again?
Oh, that's a great question. It's so interesting. I find the women I work with not only have that masculine father wound, but there seems to also be this feminine sisterhood wound as well. So I work with a lot of, I guess, women who might consider themselves uh, like lone wolves, very high achieving. And so they do have this mask with both men and women. So with women, there's a lot of like jealousy, comparison, like combativeness, and with men, it can either go one of two directions. So on the more extreme side, it's the very abusive, very overtly dominating men, right, who might engage in some sort of abusive relationship with them. Or on the other side of the spectrum, what I call the Peter Pan syndrome. It's the men who are very submissive. Oh, well, I don't like that word. I would say men who are afraid of taking responsibility, right? Who just don't want to get their life together, who basically become a child in the relationship. And so the women that I work with actually bounce back and forth between these two extremes. So they beeline into a narcissist and they have a terrible experience. And then to rebalance that, then they swing to the other side of the pendulum and then date a guy who hasn't had a job in like 50 years, right?
Right.
So, and then it's that swinging back and forth between these completely opposite expressions of the masculine, which is actually what is happening internally within themselves, that they don't feel balanced, right? And they're swinging between being the good girl and then being the good girl with the narcissist and then being the boss bitch with the Peter Pan, right? And so it matches their own internal defense mechanisms. Was that your question? I forget exactly how you phrased it, but that's the pattern that I see often. And it was the same for me as well.
So in that pattern, where was I in the pendulum? Would you experience?
Well, mine was a little bit different because I was avoiding. I had a very alpha masculine father. And so I just avoided anything that was very masculine. So I moved towards men who were less masculine and way more in their feminine. And like my last relationship, he was able to take responsibility and there was a lot of beautiful consciousness, but that was part of the dynamic. Was I was actually needing to be what my energy is I was actually needing to be met with someone that was more masculine because I have such a strong masculine. So then life organized it so that I got to look at that part of myself, which is part of what was so triggering for me with Mike, because there were these qualities that he embodied that were like my dad that I had just like completely was avoiding. And then now it was like learning how to move towards those qualities, but have a new experience. But Mike's masculinity was very triggering for me and hard. Like that was hard. But the thing is like, and I have to, it's a muscle I keep working. I have to keep working. Like we always joke when we're like on the podcast or on stage together or something. I always have this little girl that's inside and she's like, oh no, what if the masculine just takes over? And what, like, I'm always having to work with her, like, cause she's so, like there's just, and that's that inner child work I'm always doing is like, well, let's notice what is Mike doing right now? And like, it is sort of just this ongoing unwinding. So I guess in a way I was always maybe the boss, like
the boss
in a way. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. It's so interesting how everyone's wiring is so different and unique to them. So I'm more attracted to slightly more masculine, more feminine men. So my current partner is I'd say pretty balanced. I would say almost androgynous in energy. And then I know other women who are who feel a little bit repelled by that, and they're more drawn to like the more strong and dominant masculine men. Yeah, it's just very interesting to me.
Yeah. And how that gets wired in. And then also for me, it's been this dance of like, and I love, we've all touched on this, but that's why it's so important to get to know ourselves, because if you really deeply, it's like, right. So what, based on who I am and what I'm wanting to do in life, what kind of an energy would I need in order to feel met by, but we have to know, I think of me earlier in my life in previous relationships, part of it was just, I both men were beautiful men, but I didn't know myself well enough to know the qualities that I needed. Right. So part of it was ending up in a relationship where the qualities weren't the right, recipe, and then with Mike, I understood myself so much deeper, and that it meant that I was going to have to work with uncomfortable parts of myself too.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, this is what I love that we've been talking about here too, is like how important it is to have some of that deeper self-awareness of the patterns, the imprints. How was I treated growing up? How did my parents treat each other? what those places are, so that when choosing partnership, we can actually look for those qualities. And I love the pieces that you brought in, Gloria, of the behaviors to look for, the activities to be doing, to invoke maybe some stress to see how do they respond, like what comes up there. And then also some questions, like getting to know, like what are some of the dynamics, what are what are some of those places, so that there can be a foundation of safety to work from, is what I gather there. And there's so many questions I want to dive into and go deeper, just mindful of time. So I just want to thank you, Gloria, so much for bringing your work to the world, bringing your heart, bringing those vulnerable pieces of the relationship that you are nurturing and in right now. And just brings me so much joy to feel a woman in the world doing her work, tending that little girl in yourself, and bringing that into partnership and guiding other people in that process too. Because collectively, that's the biggest work. It's like healing these inner, these inner homes, and then bringing that into partnership. And yeah, thank you for bringing your story and your medicine.
Thank you so much, guys. Yeah, your words are well received. I'm very excited to share this episode with my audience and checking out the other episodes on your fabulous show. So thank you for showing up as a couple. I think it's so important for people to see examples of healthy partnership. And you guys get to do that, not just on the show, but even in your work. I think it's so needed and so incredible. So it's my complete honor for being here.
Thank you, Gloria. And for those listening that want to dive deeper in your work, you have a podcast. You want to give our listeners some information of where they can find your podcast and any other offerings that you have. And we'll, everyone listening, it'll be down in the show notes. But if you just want to share here, that'd be cool too.
Sure thing. Yeah. The easiest way to find me is just my show. It's literally called The Inner Child Podcast. And it's on every streaming website. So Spotify, Apple, YouTube. So yeah, anywhere that you listen to podcasts, you can stream it. There's a ton of good stuff on there. I do deep dives into specific attachment styles, into specific core wounds. So a lot of information there. However, if you want to do something a little bit more interactive, I do have a free workshop. It is for women who are looking to attract healthy men into their lives and who want to break that pattern. It's called How to Attract the Right Guy. And you can find that on my website, which is by bygloriazhang.com.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Gloria.
Yes.
Yeah, and thank you to Andrew, who wasn't here.
I was feeling that. Yeah.
So appreciating Andrew.
It's cooking breakfast.
Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, for his energy being here too. Beautiful. Thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed this, please go give it a 5-star rating, put some comments in there. What did this bring up in you? And until next time. Oh, and last little plug, doors are closed.
Yeah.
Human.
The New Human doors are closed.
So all of you listening that will be at the New Human, we are looking forward to seeing you.
Yeah.
Yeah, in 9 days.
9 days.
Okay, till next time.